Okay.
Hello, everyone. My name is Luba Vangelova, and I am the founder of The Hub. And I am here today with Farrar Williams, a homeschooling consultant in Washington, D.C., but I will let her give a more full intro, giving her background and her expertise.
Thanks, Luba. I'm a consultant. I work mostly with homeschoolers on how to homeschool better, how to plan, particularly the middle and high school years, and how to get into college and work on the whole college application process. I actually work with a partner. Her name is Jill Harper, and our business is called Simplify Homeschool. You can find us online. Our website is Simplify for You, and that's the number 4YOU. So it's and then also we run a large Facebook group called College Confident Homeschoolers, which folks are welcome to join. My background, I homeschooled my kids all the way through. I have twins. And they're both young adults, very young adults now. One is in college in Massachusetts, and the other is a trainee, a ballet trainee at a large company. And and so they're doing really well. I have zero regrets about taking them all the way through as homeschoolers. I'm also a former classroom teacher. I have a master's in education. And I really love working with homeschoolers and all their different individual journeys and helping them figure out how to make that work in some way for college and to sort of look good, to the outside world. Also just to support their kids better and find the right educational options, all that good stuff.
Okay. And so you had mentioned to me once that you tend to get a big burst of requests at a certain age and stage. And can you share what that age or stage is and why you get that big burst at that point?
So I sometimes say that like the high water mark of like homeschool anxiety is eighth grade, especially like going into eighth grade, because I think parents are looking at a lot of big choices, and kids are having a lot of changes. So I mean, it's sort of two pieces, right? Like on the one hand, it's an age where your kid is like 12, 13, and they are, either hitting puberty or sort of fully into puberty, and they're just changing, like their attitude changes, the things they like change, who they're friends with changes, like there's just a lot going on for them, and that's because their brains are growing like mad, and sometimes it's like an age um where parents get really frustrated. They're like, my kid used to be so good at XYZ. And now, like, we sit down to do it and they can't. Like, they get distracted. They get, because their brains are going through this period of growth that's like when they were toddlers, So, like, it really is different. And so I think parents get frustrated a lot at this age. Like, they see that some days it's like, oh my gosh, my kid's ready to do calculus, and other days, it's like, I think they forgot how to add. And the sort of tension there is really tough on parents who, it's just harder. And then they're
Mhm.
older, they have their own interests. They, sometimes they get a little rebellious. Your kid
Mhm.
who always was so compliant is suddenly like, no, I don't wanna, And so like figuring that out. And then that's the age where a lot of families are making a lot of big decisions. It's like, okay, am I going to send this kid to a school for high school, or am I going to keep homeschooling? And uh, can I really homeschool this kid who is going through all these changes? Am I really equipped? And they're also looking ahead at the subjects that come next. So a lot of families are thinking like, okay, I was fine teaching, writing and, how to read and how to add and subtract and, these basic skills. I was fine supporting those. But when they look ahead, they're like, oh, I can't teach chemistry. I can't teach, higher math. I can't teach how to write like a college level essay. And so they're getting freaked out. There's this like anxiety about that. So, and then on top of that, there's also the, oh my gosh, if we do homeschool high school, can my kid get into college?
Mhm.
And what am I going to have to do to make that happen? And am I prepared to do it? Is it really that hard? So I think there's a lot of questions and anxiety that come up at that age.
Mhm. Okay.
Yeah.
All right. That's a lot.
Yeah, it's a lot to unpack.
Um, and so, okay, so we've gone over the ages and the main concerns. So do you prioritize some of these things over others? I mean, like I said, this is a lot. So how do you figure out which of these things to advise parents to figure out first and deal with first? Because I imagine trying to figure out everything at once is a bit much.
Yeah, so I can tell you, when I work with families who are homeschooling, I kind of have two ends of my service. One is where I'm getting families ready and kids ready for college, and that's like one sort of end. The other is where I'm sort of focused on the homeschool end.
Mhm,
And they work in tandem with each other. But
mhm,
for middle school, it really is just about, like, be in the moment a little bit, and don't get too far ahead of yourself. I think, in terms of that college piece, families should just know straight off the bat, like, your kid can go to college options. Yeah, sure, there are a few schools nationwide that are a little hard on homeschoolers, but, like, for the most part, homeschoolers have a proven track record. They do fine. It's not rocket science to do paperwork and get them ready. And so I just say, especially, seventh, eighth, ninth grade, don't over focus on that, because you can do that. It's really not going to be, so put that aside. And then I think, the other piece that has to come first is always the child's needs. So, whatever, I mean, particularly if there are mental health concerns, or anything in that realm, you that has to come first. And so everything has to be filtered, like, is this going to be the best thing for this child? And so
mhm,
everything kind of has to be filtered through that. So, sure, you can have long-term goals, and those can be your family goals, like, it's our goal for our student to learn two languages, or
mhm,
it's our goal for our student to get through a certain level of math, or whatever it is. Or they can be in terms of, long term, it's our goal for our kid to have this certain level of college options. Those are outside external things, and it's okay to push kids, if they're ready and if they want it too. But you have to think about, okay, how are we going to get there? What does the child need, and what are their interests? What are their goals? So I
mhm,
think those things have to kind of be in the mix first.
mhm.
Um, and so, what does the student need?
So what I'm seeing, and I'm sure you have also in Facebook groups, is the posts where parents have decided to homeschool. I think it happens mostly with parents who actually are just starting their homeschool journey during the teen years. And I'll see posts that say, we've deschooled, which we can get into what that means, because a lot of people may not know the term, but we deschooled for a few months, but all my child wants to do is skateboard and play video games. Is this what homeschooling is going to look like if I look at what their interests are? They're not interested in anything. They're not motivated. Panic, panic, panic. So which, I mean, I imagine they're like extrapolating to age 40, and they'll still be living in their parents' basement and just still be skateboarding and playing video games, kind of like I, I mean, it reminds me of homeschool co-ops when kids were around 5, 6, 7, 8, and just wanted to play on the swings. And I remember at that point, parents angsting about, all my child wants to do a swing. And they were probably extrapolating, like they'll be 18 and still just swinging on the swings, but they outgrew it, you know.
Yeah. Yeah, I mean, it's an interesting thing. I, I'm really in favor of, um, giving kids a lot of leeway, for a really long time. I think by the time that they get to high school age, you do kind of have to think about, okay, um, how are you going to launch this kid? Because I do think that that's a question,
Mhm.
and that can be, that can be so many ways. Like, some kids just launch themselves,
Mhm.
because they have, internal goals, and, they have plans, and they are going to make them happen with just a little bit of support. Other kids need some structure. They need to know that they're meeting some milestones, that they're keeping up with their peers, and also that they're going to have the external validation that they need in order to go on and get a job, and, go to college, and do whatever it is that they're gonna, what direction they're gonna head.
Mhm.
And so I do think it's harder, especially when families, like, if a family pulls a kid from school in 10th grade, it's hard to take a long-term break unless you absolutely have to from school, because, there are certain things that a kid needs to do in order to say that they, have finished high school. And if you're not making progress on those things, that can also be detrimental to a student's mental health. And so you want your kid to feel like they're making progress. And so sitting around and deschooling, or letting them, skateboard and play video games, which are fine passions, um like, it can actually hurt them too. And so I think it's a good idea to sort of think about, what's the structure that is going to help a student, be successful. When students lack motivation, I think that's really tough. And it is it, it is one profile of student and family that, I'll just be honest, I think everyone struggles the most to help. And I have suggestions depending on the kid. I've seen some success, in, helping some kids, just get started on, earning some high school credits in some really basic ways.
Mhm.
Um, but you really have to, um, I think that one is tough. Like, I'll just be honest. Like, um, so it just depends. I do think that, like, sometimes dual enrollment and college credits are actually a big motivator for for older high school students. Starting 10th, 11th grade,
Mhm.
because I think they can see, assuming they're in a reasonably with their peers in terms of their skill sets. I think that they can get in there and see that that it's not sort of magical, that they they have the ability to kind of step in and do, these basic, community college level courses, that they're not beyond their skill set for most students who are on par with their peers. If you choose something where they have some confidence, and,
Mhm.
in an area
Mhm.
of interest.
Okay.
And so I think that can be motivating. Some students get in there and then they realize, like, oh, like, I understand this. I'm earning credits towards a degree. It actually can really help with their motivation.
Mhm.
Um, I think also getting a job can help students at that age, because when they're earning money and out in the working world, they see that, okay, like, this is, do I want to have this type of job forever? You know,
Mhm.
or, like, do I have other goals? What do I need to do to meet those goals?
Mhm.
And I think that's really motivating. Money is motivating for
Yeah.
kids sometimes. Um,
And
so
mhm.
yeah, I think those are potential things that can help.
and sorry.
Yeah.
So do you find that the motivation issue is as much of an issue for parents, for families who have been homeschooling all along, or do you notice that more with parents who have only just pulled their kids out of school in the teen years?
I think it's a mix. I think it's a mix.
Okay.
I think the things that lead to students having a real lack of academic motivation, or not even always academic, but just sort of personal motivation. I mean, I think are usually tied to mental health. Sometimes they're structural. And so, they've had a bad experience with school, like, and then that's bad, or they've been in a household where learning was really unstructured and that was a challenge for them. It was a mismatch for their style, so there can be structural things that lead students to be just unmotivated. But I think a lot of the time it is about mental health. And so figuring out that piece is sometimes important. And it's frustrating for me, as someone who's an educational consultant, to come in and have to say to a family, look, I can make these suggestions that I think will be helpful, but you have to get, you have to get this other piece settled, and I can't diagnose your kid, right?
Mhm.
That's not my job. So there are
Mhm.
other pieces that have to come in with that.
Mhm.
And I think, yeah, again, structurally, I can make suggestions around that. But there is this other piece. So,
Right. And you mentioned, so the family can have goals like knowing certain subjects or going to a certain institution or type of institution, never
mhm.
mind a certain one. But you mentioned also looking at what the students' interests and goals are. So, what do you advise when those two things conflict? The parents' goals and the young person's goals?
It's always tricky. I think that I I don't want to say that family goals are unimportant, because I actually think that they can be really good for students. And also it's okay for families to have those, those goals. I think they have to look at two things. I think they have to look at the student that they have, and whether or not those goals are realistic for their individual kid. I mean, it always is the case that, I mean, a family may come to education thinking like, oh, I want like this very classical education, and I want to, I want my kid to like learn to speak Latin, and I want them to learn rhetoric, and I want them to, you know and and then the kid is just mad for STEM. They just want to learn science. And so, it's just this mismatch. Are those goals actually super important or not? If the student wants to go into a field where a lot of that stuff, if you spend a ton of time on it, is going to be at the detriment, because there's only so much time. And that's something I think families sometimes need to hear, is that, because I think some families think, well, we'll just do this on top of, on top of, on top of.
Mm.
And there's really a cost there. And you have to think about the opportunity cost. If you prioritize that your kid learns Latin, what's the opportunity cost for that in terms of something else? And so I think that, I don't know. It's like I said, it's tough. I think, if for a kid who's relatively school motivated and has and also capable, like, and sometimes, things align, I think it's okay to have a goal or two. And families sometimes have goals that aren't, I'm mentioning these things like learn extra foreign languages, and, all these, get through calculus too. Like, there are these goals like that, but then there are also things like, okay, I want my student to take a personal finance course, or it's really important to me that my student take a really comprehensive whole body, sexuality course or something, like, or like things like that, that are also, or that my kid do, half credit worth of PE every semester, like, or every year or something, so I think that those things, sometimes families have goals that are about the whole child, or like, oh, that we travel, as a family. That's one that I run into a lot, where, the family goal is to travel, the kid enjoys it too. And then you have to sort of question, but then maybe the student has a goal, and maybe the family supports it, to, attend a really prestigious college. And so is the travel getting in the way of the student, taking an AP class or doing dual enrollment, or, taking on a big project with research that they're doing, so, you know, it, it, it really is just sort of fitting the puzzle pieces together, I think.
Mhm.
Those goals are important. The kids' goals are really important too. And I do think parents have to listen to their kid.
Mhm.
Um, because to me, the most frustrating thing is when the parents are like, oh, you know, little Johnny is going to be an engineer. And meanwhile, the kid, little Johnny, is like, it's okay. I like that. Oh my gosh, I really love Spanish, And it's like, okay, this is different. And you need to listen to where your kid is thriving.
Mhm. Mhm. Um, so it's interesting. The word listen to your kids specifically has come up in a number of contexts and conversations just in the last couple of weeks. It seems to be such a biggie, such a foundational thing. Um, and so what would you consider the must-haves? I mean, you said don't try to pile things on top, try to pile too much, and but also the opportunity costs. I mean, what would you consider, if anything, to and what would you advise parents to consider to to keep as the must-haves? Let's say their child, and I believe this was the situation with one of your children, is like really interested in performing arts. So if they want to get good at that, obviously they would need to invest, a considerable amount of time and energy and focus on that. But would you advise a parent in that kind of situation, or any situation, to also kind of make sure to do X, Y, and Z? Or do you just encourage them to say, go for it, see how far you can go with this and what you can do with that?
Yeah, I think that's and I honestly, like, I've ended up working with a lot of dance families. So my son is a dancer. He's a trainee at the Washington Ballet. By the time that he graduated, he was dancing, I don't know, like 20 hours a week. And so that's like a lot. And some kids can keep up, or I mean, and even more during Nutcracker and performance seasons. And then plus in the summer, um, so some kids can keep up that kind of schedule, that intensity, and also get a lot of academics done, but a lot of them can't. And it was non-negotiable for us and for our family that he, graduate high school, with a sort of basic number of credits, that would open college doors for him long term. And I think that was just important to us. He did in fact apply to colleges. He took a gap year dancing. He applied to colleges, and then he's now taking a second gap year dancing, actually, because he deferred. He got into a bunch of schools, not for dance, because he doesn't want to study dance. He wanted to study urban planning. He is currently deferred from University of Vermont in the School of the Environment, for sustainable planning. And he may go next year. I'm just not sure. It's up to him. But I feel really glad that I gave him that opportunity. He did not have as many academic courses as his twin. So, his brother, graduated senior year with like, I don't know, I want to say like five, I think five dual enrollment courses, and, two AP courses, and, a lot of additional credits. He had five core credits, and he had 5 credits across the board in every area, which I don't necessarily recommend. But he sort of purposefully was a generalist. Though he did additionally have like 5 credits in arts and technology, because he's among other things studying game design right now. So yeah, so there is a path for your kids who like video games, I guess.
Mhm.
But so he just had a really robust transcript. And it opened a lot of doors for him. And I'll add too that he was test optional and got into all his schools. He did really well. And whereas my dancer, not as much. We ended up using ASU for dual enrollment because the courses are short term. 8-week courses. So you get a whole year's credit in 8 weeks. And that was useful for my dancer because even though some of the courses could be a little bit intense, he could focus on less. And so we ended up using his senior year. It was pretty much all dual enrollment. And some people may be familiar with ASU. They have 2 ways that you can do dual enrollment. One is called Universal Learner. You pay $25 to enroll, and then there's no risk. If you earn a good grade, then you pay for the credit, and then if you don't, you don't. But then you can also do traditional dual enrollment through their online school called Prep Digital. And then you can take any course. And he took courses in sustainable planning, and that's part of how he ended up with this interest. He was sort of like, oh, I think I'd like to do that. And I was like, you would? Okay. But he tried it. It was really good. He really liked the course. And so that's how he ended up with this particular interest. That was a good method for him, but it was still, again, fewer credits overall. And he definitely did not have a robust transcript, but it was okay. And so I do think it's important to make sure that students have those options, and it doesn't take a lot for kids to have enough credits to go to college. But the higher you aim, the more important it is to have external validation, like some dual enrollment or AP courses or stellar letters of recommendation, or really impressive like course descriptions with incredible book lists, things like that add external validation. So the higher a student wants to aim, like if they want to aim towards big name schools, then they need those kinds of things. Okay. In addition, potentially to like a high test score, though not necessarily. Again, it depends, but they need some of those things. Which ones depends on the student. But a student who just has the basics, like, okay, I have 4 years of English and 4 years of math and 3 years of science and 3 years of social studies, and I got my 2 foreign languages in, and then I have some electives, and I got my, 22, 24 credits, like, real baseline. And those students will have options too, even if they didn't do a lot of the external validation. So it just depends on where you're aiming and how what your goals are, what the kids' goals are.
And so, and it's not technically necessary that they have those things as of the age of 18. I mean, if they have them by the age of 19, 20, would you say, 21, whatever? I mean, if they're kind of doing more elective-y things, or, focusing their attention elsewhere, do you think there's any disadvantage to taking longer?
I don't think there's any disadvantage to taking a 5th year. And I don't think it's not only, so, I mean, I've worked with 2 types of students taking a 5th year. One is a student who is a type of student who, is just missing some things. Like, I'm thinking of a student that I worked with who had lots of, credits in things like philosophy and English and writing, and had not done math. And so in the course of a year and a half, used, there's an online provider that does all of math in a semester. So bing, bang, boom, algebra, geometry, algebra 2, done, so that it could just be done and could have just this very basic level. And she did very well in the college process. It was totally the right decision that she took this 5th year. And not out of step with her peers, it's really good. But also I've worked with students who had, learning disabilities or a health issue, students who have like a chronic health issue, for example, or a mental health crisis, or a family crisis, where a parent has, something.
Mhm.
I think that is those are good reasons to take a fifth year. Uh, so I do think like a fifth year is a good thing. When you get beyond that, there are always going to be options. Like the door never closes to go to college or to go into a trade or to learn more in your life as a lifelong learner. Like those doors never close,
Mhm.
but it does start to get harder. So you are closing some pathways. And so you know, I do think it is better to get your kid some level of graduated high school, by the time that they're, you know, 19, by the end of age 19.
Mhm.
Um, because I think, again, this comes back to that thing that I said earlier about mental health. I've seen it really be detrimental to kids. Like, I've seen parents be really proud that they let their kid do whatever the kid wanted, and the kid, like, look at how amazing they are at, and, mountain biking and graphic design, or, like these,
Mhm.
cool things like for life. And I think that that's really good, actually. But then the kid is really glad that they have this confidence in these areas, but then they look at this and they're like, I don't know if I can go to college. I don't know what I do next. I don't know what my pathway looks like.
Mhm.
And they feel anxious about it. And I can just say that most of the time, that's what I've observed. And so, I just think it's for their benefit that they come out feeling that way.
Mhm.
Um, and it doesn't take much. I mean, they don't even have to do foreign language, or, you can just be super bare bones for a kid to go into community college. You really don't have to do a lot. I mean, and you can, like, a class doesn't have to be like, this is this very official, we did this curriculum outside AP course, or it doesn't have to be that way. English can be, the kid read a pile of books and we talked about them, and they took that creative writing workshop, and you just push it together, and it's like, okay, that was English for this year. And then the next year, like, okay, the kid did a bunch of writing for their business that they were running on the side, and they ended up doing that book club with those other kids. And then and then we had that little mini unit where we saw Shakespeare play. Okay, then that's English for that year. So it doesn't have to be that it's this very, but it also can be. And I think when kids are interested in a particular area, it's good to make sure that they have the skills. Like you know, sometimes I work with students who are really interested in, engineering or something, and then the parents never made sure that they got the math and the physics. And it's like, okay, but if they're really going to go into this area, it's great that they're doing, like, the first robotics, or and then this, and that they've, programmed this, and they've done, like, it's awesome. But they're not going to have additional options until they've done these basic building blocks. And so, having like an official course with some feedback and some back and forth, like, then that can be helpful in those areas.
Mhm.
And so then maybe that kid, okay, he just read some nonfiction. We made sure he could write a paragraph that was
Mhm.
English that year,
Mhm.
So it it it's that balance too, and making sure they have the options that they're going to want,
Mhm.
and pushing them through the basics for those things.
Mhm. Okay. And just on that hypothetical example that you mentioned about, a child has been kind of focusing a lot of their energy on, let's say, you mentioned mountain biking and graphic design, but then some doors may close. But if they do have a pathway in mind and want to be a professional graphic designer, would you also kind of feel like um, the parents should be, making sure that they have those other bases all covered by age 19 as well, if they have like a clear goal in their mind and the parents are fine with it and so on?
I mean, I guess yes, because even if you go to like I mean, this is something I've encountered with kids who are interested in, conservatory programs or art programs. Those schools want to see that students have the basics down because they don't teach them.
Mm,
And so, and it doesn't take a ton, you don't have to have stellar academics if you've got a stellar portfolio. You know, if your voice is the voice of an angel, you can get into amazing programs with the very basics checked on your transcript. And so it really, if the parents are able to support that, because I will say I mean, that is another piece that conservatory programs for the arts and art schools, or art specific schools, they do cost more and have less financial aid, so families have to think about that. Uh, and there are programs at schools that have more financial aid, but then you often have to have stronger academics to access them. So then these are sort of, sometimes the financial goals for a family have to come into play as well. But in a general sense, with a blank canvas and all the money in the world and all that kind of stuff, then yeah, I still think families should make sure that kids get just the basics, in order to then go on.
okay.
And it actually will help them, like a kid who's interested in graphic design, one of the best things to access is dual enrollment, actually, because um, there are some really good, like graphic design courses dual enrollment. Same thing for music. I think some families don't realize this, but like, music, and arts and graphic design, um, all really great ways to use community college.
Mhm. And so, yeah, I was just going to ask you to clarify. When you say dual enrollment, are you only talking specifically about community college, or is it a broader pool of options for dual enrollment?
So dual enrollment just means that you're getting credit, uh, through your homeschool, like you're giving high school credit. And typically one semester or a 3 credit course equals 1 year. And that's pretty widely accepted nationwide. And so like if you're using a 1 credit per year course system, then a 3 or 4 credit course dual enrollment, that's a 1 credit course for your homeschool. And then you're getting the credit both ways. um, it's usually community college, but there's online dual enrollment options. Sometimes 4-year colleges provide dual enrollment options, so they're not a community college, they're like a 4-year
Mhm.
college. Sometimes schools have extension schools, that provide dual enrollment, like Harvard has an extension school. Working with a student who lives locally there, and he taken lots of Harvard extension courses because they're kind of cool. So you're in there with lots of retired people. But it is a college credit, like it's a real credit. Um, it's really any credit that you're getting through a college institution that you're also putting on your transcript,
Mhm.
for high school. Um, it's really useful for external validation, and I don't want families to overemphasize external validation. You need a little bit, and the higher your student is aiming, the more you need. But even with students who are aiming at really high levels, in terms of prestigious colleges, I actually have seen that they don't do as well if they went all in and just did dual enrollment. Like, because then it just kind of looks like meh, like you just did a bunch of community college classes. Like, so I've worked with students who have like associate's degrees, like, and they're applying to like, higher end schools, but sometimes it just kind of looks very basic. All they did were all these requirements to get an associate's degree. Whereas when I work with students who used dual enrollment strategically, like, this is my area of interest, I took all the courses in it.
Mhm.
And then I did these other things at home. Or like I did a bunch of things across the board, or like, I wanted like high quality science. So I did that there. And and then I was interested in history. So I did that there. It just used it strategically, and then had additional coursework at home that's interesting and enriching and, has this balance. It builds a better, more interesting transcript, I find.
Mm.
So, so using it strategically is different for each student. It could just mean you take 2 classes, that's it. That's
Mhm.
strategic.
Mhm.
One class junior year, one class senior year, like that can be strategic. um, other students, it means that you take every single course that the biology department offers, so it just, again, it depends.
Right.
Um,
Although, I, I assume that one of the aims of the kids who have an associate's degree by the time they're 18 or whatever, um, is if they're aiming to then transfer to a 4-year college, and then they've already got 2 years of college under their belt. And so it saves on the college costs.
So this depends, and brings up some other questions about dual enrollment. Like, so first of all, if you get all of those credits through dual enrollment, you can still apply as a freshman,
Mhm.
and there are benefits to applying as a freshman. In particular, there tends to be more financial aid available for freshmen and more merit scholarships. It's not always true. There's still financial aid and merit scholarships available to transfer students, but that's something to take into consideration. Additionally, if you do a bunch of, dual enrollment, and then you manage to get into Princeton, they're not going to take any of it. And so, or maybe they'll take just a couple of courses or something, so you're not really saving a lot of money or time. If you do want to go to your state school, though, you can transfer. I just think it's a complex thing. Most students who, and just generally speaking, dual enrollment, some families think, the purpose of this is to save money. And I would say it can be, but if you're going to go that route, you need to know what you're doing.
Mhm.
Like, you need to know where your student is going to end up and have a realistic plan for them to end up there.
Mhm.
Because if they don't end up there, there's a good chance that their dual enrollment won't all transfer.
Mhm.
And so you won't save money.
Right.
And so part of the purpose of using that dual enrollment is to get your kid into college in the first
Mhm.
place and to get them merit aid and to get them,
Mhm.
so it's just to think about,
Mhm.
how are you using it? And again, strategic. What is the purpose of this? Is it to save money? If so, you need to plan for your student to go to an in-state school where those credits will transfer.
Yeah. And I don't know if it's the same in every state, but I know in some states, such as I believe Virginia, you are, I think, pretty much guaranteed entry into a state school if you have an associate's degree and a certain grade point average.
Mhm.
So, especially if you live in a state with, very competitive state colleges, I guess that can take one worry off the plate in terms of admission.
It
Um,
can, and it can mean that a student can, can start dual enrollment in high school, and keep their options open. And then they can graduate, finish out those courses in a year, get a job, just have a little bit more
mhm,
freedom,
mhm.
and then transfer guaranteed it, potentially into a state flagship, that might be really hard to get into.
Yeah.
So, yeah,
Yeah.
it can be a good option.
Yeah.
Absolutely.
And so that was interesting, I think, for a lot of parents to know. I just want to circle back to highlight one thing you mentioned, in case they missed it, because you said some of the kids who have not done, 4 years of English, 4 years of math, it tends to probably be more the math that people maybe have this issue with more so than English, I would imagine. Maybe also science, but where they can catch up very quickly, you said, in a semester long course you mentioned that covers like all the kind of basic math in a much shorter period of time. So it's so to not necessarily panic if you've gotten that far but are missing something, that there are ways to catch up.
Yeah, absolutely. Mr. D's Math is the one that I recommend for that. They're an online provider. They have math in a semester courses. They're live. You meet 3 times a week, and they have it condensed in such a way that I've seen a number of students be really successful with them. Now, are these the right option for a kid who's like really driven and wants, engineering or something like,
Right, right, right.
eh, you
Yeah.
know, but they do check the box.
Mhm.
And I think you don't want to put yourself in that position if you can plan ahead. Like I would encourage, when I work with clients like from, 8th grade or 9th grade on, I don't let them get in that position. But I have lots of clients come to me, junior year or even senior year, and they are thinking about taking that extra 5th year, and, and it happens, like, so it's not the end of the world. It also is the case that, like, a student who's kind of gifted in math can use that kind of thing to accelerate themselves, so maybe they didn't, the family didn't have like a super organized math plan, and then the kid is taking algebra 1 in, or is only going into algebra 1 in 9th grade, and they realize but they want to get through calculus, so then they need to accelerate
Mm,
a little bit.
mhm.
They can use something like that.
Okay. Um, all right. And so one other thing I want, there are two other things that I would like to try and cover. One is, um, so what if either the student or, well, the child or the parents are hoping to or thinking about, want to keep open the option of going to high school at some point, maybe because of the social experience
Mm-hmm.
or could be anything, you know. Um, so, how do you advise people to do that, given that it varies from state to state and I guess jurisdiction to jurisdiction in terms of whether a high school will even accept credits that even if a student has taken what looks exactly like the same class that a
Mm-hmm.
high school offers, but they've taken it throughout school or through
Yeah.
whatever. I mean, it could be anything. Um, or it could even be at another school. I mean, I guess high schools are not obligated to take credits from other schools necessarily, even, let alone homeschool. But how do you advise parents to keep that door open, or do you just advise them otherwise? Or
Do it in 9th grade. I mean, seriously. And 9th grade is the year that matters the least for the kids' long-term plans. And I mean, that's and then they're starting with their peers. I do think it's better. And I guess I would start by saying I do think it's right for some kids to go to school. Like, I just, I think this goes down to like prioritizing mental health. Like, I believe in homeschooling. I think it is amazing. I think it can allow families to really customize a student's path. I think there's so many opportunities if you're really, aware of it, and if your student has, reasonable buy-in. But if your student doesn't have buy-in, and if they're suffering because they're struggling to connect with peers, because that can happen, I think, do consider it, and consider it for 9th grade specifically, just to see if it works, because it's so much easier to pull a kid. You can always pull them, but you can't always send them. And I tell families, like, okay, you can do some things to try to, improve your odds of getting these credits transferred, keep the door open a little bit more, but it's still, there's no guarantees.
Mhm.
And the ways that you get guarantees, like, for example, using like accredited courses, or like, I know in Virginia, they have like a list specifically of like online providers who are approved. Some states have that, and some states it's any accredited course. So there are providers who are accredited. More providers are getting accredited now, online. I work for AIM Academy, and I teach a couple history courses and a film as literature course, which is really fun. And AIM is now accredited as of now. They just got their provisional accreditation. It'll be permanent by the end of the year, or it expires, but it'll be official. And there are other providers like that, but it limits you so
Mhm,
much.
mhm,
And I say that as someone who teaches for an accredited provider. Like, it just, it means that you lose a lot of flexibility.
mhm.
And I think I just don't, I think it's trying to keep one foot in, one foot out, and it can kind of ruin really embracing homeschooling for ninth grade and what it can offer if you try to have it both ways. And
Mhm.
and again, I say this as someone who typically, to most clients, would end up recommending at least a couple of accredited courses, not because accredited is a necessity. You don't need accreditation
Mhm.
to apply to college. You don't need it. It's not actually a mark of higher quality. The
Mhm.
best chemistry, the best physics class I know, not accredited, and so this is not, and like AOPS, for example, like the best math courses, not accredited. So, this is, it's not a mark of this is better.
Mhm.
Okay. And so don't hyper focus on that, but it just, it, it ruins your flexibility.
Right.
So you know, on the other hand, I have seen students go in
Mhm.
and get all their credits accepted and have it be okay.
Mhm.
So,
Yeah.
you know,
I mean, I know one consideration can be that kind of in ninth grade, there's still kind of, I don't know, parents may be concerned about kind of the social milieu in high school, and maybe their child is not quite ready to enter the fray, so to speak, and maybe it kind of feels more um, okay to send them off into that a bit later once they're more prepared to deal with certain peer pressures or certain kind of the weirdness that happens
yeah, no, I
or
get
that
that.
can happen, not necessarily, but yeah.
I
um,
mean, I will say, if families have the resources, private schools are often way better on both of those ends, like both for ninth grade and being a little gentler, just a smaller environment typically, but also with accepting credits.
mhm,
So, that often is an option, but not everyone has the resources,
mhm,
either monetarily or geographically. Like, sometimes
right,
there aren't good options
right.
nearby.
Okay, and so the last thing I wanted to cover is um, how do you would so one of the things you mentioned that parents start worrying about um, is how will I teach my child X, Y, or Z? I mean, most parents, I think, unless it's their field of expertise, have probably forgotten a lot of what they themselves learned in high school. So even if they did well in it, they may be like, I don't remember any of this.
Yeah.
How am I going to help my child learn this? And so, how do you advise them to? Do you advise them to just rely on third party providers and basically be a curator and kind of a manager of the education, or do you have other suggestions?
I mean, I think, for some of it, I, I, I think it's a mix. Uh, I think you can rely on third party providers. I think that that's not a bad thing. I mean, I am a third party provider, so I don't, like, I definitely think that that's something you can do. And there are benefits to that. I think families should definitely think about using at least some third party providers, whether that's a local co op or a micro school or something, or whether that's like, an online live course, like with interaction with a teacher, or a dual enrollment course, like lots of options
Mhm.
by junior year. for two reasons. One, your student needs letters of recommendation. They need them from someone outside if they're going to go to a four-year school. And that can include some schools that aren't necessarily like that hard to get into. They may still require a letter of recommendation, and a letter of recommendation from someone outside the family will be a boon to your student, particularly from a teacher. So not just a coach or, you know, an art class mentor or something like that, but like specifically someone who taught your student academically. And many schools actually require it, or require it specifically from homeschoolers. So you want your student junior year to have those relationships so that that is an option. But additionally, it's just good for your student to have outside voices in their life, including academically. So I think that's, you know, and my kids, I can just say, were done with me by senior year. And I taught many things up to junior year, but by junior year, I was teaching less than half the things. And senior year, I was teaching nothing except health. I did do health. But that was it. And so everything was farmed out, even things that I'm sort of an expert in, like history and English, which I teach, like they were done with me. And I think that that was the right call. So, so all of that was just sort of a slow, you know, movement away. But the other thing I would say with this is that, you know, self-study is okay. And there's nothing wrong with it. Some students do better with it than others. And some subjects are better than others. So some students, I think, you know, some subjects like history, and again, I'm a history teacher, so I love history, but like, you know, it's fine to use great courses and like a pile of books or something. Like it's totally okay to have it be primarily input. You know, English also, like, I mean, you do want to make sure your student can write an essay, but you know, it's once they can, like, you know, they can just be practicing, like you don't have to necessarily do quite as much. And self-study and independent study, totally fine. And some students do fine with math. And there are, you know, things like Think Well and, you know, that are computer-based programs, and or like teaching textbooks or even Khan Academy. And there's a number of options for math where there's not a teacher, an outside teacher. And some students are fine with that, but other students really need that back and forth in order to really grasp the subject. And that's the same thing with science. Like, okay, biology, you know, you can, you know, do certain things and it's not so different. But then, you know, with chemistry, you're balancing equations, there's math involved. Same thing with physics. Like, you know, maybe your student needs someone to help them understand it and you need an outside teacher if you can't do it, you know, because some families, there is a parent who can teach all the way through multivariable calculus.
Right.
It just depends. But I would say that's the best way to do that is get an outside teacher. And there's so many available now, so many, and so many formats. So
yes, it's stunning the options that have proliferated. I mean, just in the last 3 years alone, the options have mushroomed, just
absolutely.
mushroomed.
Yeah.
And it's almost like decision fatigue now. It's the bigger time commitment.
It's true. I mean, I think it, you know, with these providers, like there are some that I like better than others. You know, it just depends on, you know, what you're looking for. With my go-tos, I'll just say, you know, I teach for AIM, but they are many other classes really good. And for AP classes, additionally, Pennsylvania Homeschoolers is really good. For really high level English and science and math, Blue Tent is really excellent. But there are a bunch of others out there, you know, and it depends on what you're looking for, what the student wants. I mean, like I often recommend like Online G3 as a place that has courses that are more input and less output. They're a little easier. But they have like really interesting high level input with lots of options and things. So, you know, different providers have different vibes. And, you know, and can always find short-term things on OutSchool. I think those are a little bit harder. I mean, there are some really great teachers on OutSchool, but it's sometimes a little harder to get quite as high level or quite as organized as some of the providers that are more focused on like really academic coursework.
Mhm.
Sometimes that's what you want. You want something a little lighter. You want something
Mhm.
a little bit more exploratory, and
Mhm.
out
Mhm.
school is really good for that. Also really good for electives and art and things like that. So
All right. And I guess the one last thing is, do parents come to you concerned about the social aspects? So we've talked about the academics, and I think we've pretty much covered all the kind of main topics there. Do they come with you with that concern, or is that less of a stress point for them?
the last couple years it's been a major stress point. I think when I first started doing this a few years ago, it was less of a stress point. And then the pandemic happened and it was a stress point, but nobody could do anything about it.
Yeah.
And then, the pandemic sort of restrictions mostly ended, but the fallout from it has continued. And a lot of students in the last couple of years have really struggled. And, I saw homeschool co ops and traditional homeschool groups just fall apart. A lot of them stopped existing. And I see that now they are rebuilding,
Mhm.
and I think there's more possibilities. But I mean, it has been a struggle. I can't always help, when it's local families or when I have local resources, which I do for some areas all over the country at this point.
Mhm.
Um, then sometimes I can make some suggestions,
Mhm.
but you know, I can't always.
Mhm.
And the other thing I'd say about that is families should prioritize those things.
Mhm.
And particularly seventh, eighth grade, really prioritize those things. And the reason I say that is, you know, seventh, eighth grade, the same thing I said, starting out, it's a crucible, it's a decision-making point for
Mhm.
families. And if you feel like your student isn't going to have a peer group, then you're more likely to send them to high school.
Mhm.
And if you feel like they are going to have a peer group because you prioritized it, they have those relationships, and the other families also feel like they have those relationships and
Mhm.
that they're solid and that those kids are going to be available, they're your kids' friends,
Mhm.
then you're more likely to homeschool
Mhm.
because then they have a social group
Mhm.
and you're less concerned.
Right.
And so I would just say it's a reason to prioritize those things. But then even later, especially if your student is unhappy, I mean, sometimes I talk to families and they've got like a junior or a 10th grader or a junior or something, and the kid is unhappy, and we're like, look, you just have to prioritize. We know you don't want to drive 30 minutes to get to that co-op. And we know that you think that their academics are in the pits, but it doesn't
Mhm.
matter. Your
Mhm.
kid can take computer science that they've already done before and art that they don't care
Mhm.
about,
Mhm.
and like whatever, and then sit with these other kids at recess and lunch and make friends and have
Right.
social time,
Right.
because that is what is important. And you just have to prioritize it. Like, yes, it's great that your kid is doing dual enrollment and blah blah blah, but if they're not getting what they need through it, which
Mhm.
sometimes they do, by the way, I have some students, and it particularly in some areas, dual enrollment can be a social lifeline too.
Sure. Yeah.
And kids can join in community college. If dual enrolled students can typically do all the things that other students do, like join clubs and
Mhm.
I've had a number of students become the president of a community college club as part of their activities. So there's opportunities there too, but
Mhm.
families have to prioritize that stuff
Mhm.
and recognize that it's really important, and just as important as Spanish 4 or calculus or whatever.
Right. All right. And on that note, we're about at the hour mark. So
Yeah.
thank you very much. And can you just mention again your website?
Yeah. So the my company is Simplify Homeschool, and our website is www.simplify4u.com, and that's the number 4YOU. And again, also I moderate a large group on Facebook called College Confident Homeschoolers. Little play on a particular forum online that folks may know. But just give a lot of advice free there. So if people want to join.
Thank you.
Yeah.